Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intelligence Report podcast. I am your host, Dylan Welch. We have a really exciting guest joining us today, Adam Dungan. So a little bit about Adam. He served in the Marines for 5 years. He went on to be a CIA case officer, and now he is running for the Democratic nominee in Virginia's 8th Congressional District. A really storied career background. We're going to share some really interesting things happening in the world. And Adam, I know you're a really busy guy at the moment, so I appreciate you joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Dylan. I'm still getting used to doing the whole media ecosystem right now. So, thanks for making it easy on me with having the podcast focused on all the things that I care about.
Of course. Well, I mean, that's how I originally found you, was social media. I started following you on Instagram. You're putting really good content out there. So it's interesting, the world we live in, especially when it comes to politics. We live in that sort of media influencer celebrity, you kind of have to be a part of it. So congratulations on embracing it, going viral, building up your following, which hopefully will lead to success in the near future. Start with kind of the beginning. So you've had a really cool, badass career. Tell us about, from California to the Marines to the CIA to what you're doing now. Just walk us through that journey. Was that a plan the whole time, or have you just been kind of seeing where it takes you, or is it a combination of both?
Mostly the latter. It was never a plan to join up in the military. I was actually very, very different when I was a kid. I played guitar and I was in bands and I thought I was going to be a rock star. And then one day, the sudden realization that I needed to clean my life up hit. And so the Marines was the answer for that. So, I wanted to go see the world. I wanted some discipline. I wanted something to be proud of. And that's what I did. And it worked out really well. I really enjoyed my time in the Marines. I had a combat deployment to Afghanistan, which I would say was foundational in teaching me, what the world is really like out there. But I also, if you run into any of my old Marine buddies, they'll tell you I wasn't exactly the most semper fi gun ho Marine, because I was always a kid from Los Angeles at the end of the day. But with the discipline and the opportunity, the GI Bill that the military gave me, I liked serving my country and I wanted to do it in a way that I thought could make more impact. So that led me to pursuing my career in intelligence, and it just kept working. I just kept going, kept trying to put myself in situations that I thought mattered. And I had a lot of unique opportunities within CIA to have that kind of impact that I wanted. And then as far as politics go, this was never a plan. I never intended to do any of this. I assume there's lots of military intelligence guys that listen to this podcast, and to give you some context on my run for Congress now is I was at 17 years of federal service, and because of some shenanigans I saw from lack of oversight and some bad policy that I thought might be actively degrading our operations overseas, I resigned in protest to make this run for Congress. I cashed out my TSP and really committed 100% to this thing. For better or for worse, I'm locked in.
Well, thank you for your service. And I love hearing that kind of continual journey of growth to give back, and that's what I think is really cool about your career, is you can kind of follow those steps, and the opportunity to give back just keeps growing and growing as you learn and apply new skills. Talk us through that transition from the Marines into the Foreign Service and the CIA world. What was that like for you? How did you kind of go from active duty into the CIA?
So without giving too much detail on the back end, a part of my deployment to Afghanistan, I came across some teams that were working as part of not just CIA, but DIA. You had some NSA guys out there. You had lots of people floating around. And I started noticing that those teams, they had a lot of autonomy. They had a lot of trust on behalf of their organizations. And I wanted that because I love the Marine Corps, all the respect to the men and women still serving right now, but you are treated kind of like a kid, no matter what rank you're in. There's lots of regiment. There's lots of by the book rote solution to not just war planning or gaming, but even your barracks life back home. And so I got kind of jealous looking at these guys that had all the autonomy in the world and seemed to be very confident in what they were doing and how they were doing it. So I was like, I want that. I want to be that. So I pursued that once I got out through some contacts that I'd made, and then it just kind of worked out for me. I think one of the cool things about serving in the U.S. military is the credentials that it gives you. People respect what it means to serve, especially the Marine Corps. So that gave me a leg up in getting into that world. And then once I got in that world, the transition was pretty wild because you do suddenly have all of this autonomy, but people also expect you to perform at the professional level that they're performing at. It's not really like a training environment once you get into the intelligence services. It's a performing environment. And that's very, very different from the Marine Corps. So it was a different paradigm to get around. And then beyond that, I was suddenly undercover. Like I couldn't tell people what I was doing. I had to be very careful about, what I said, where I was. The level of cognitive load that you're under once you're in a position like that, that's something that takes a lot of getting used to. And luckily I was able to get there.
That's great. Can you share any interesting stories or experiences or learning lessons or takeaways from your time in the CIA?
Sure. I mean, I got a couple. Maybe when I first got in, I moved out to the East Coast to Virginia because that's where CIA is. Obviously, it's where half the federal architecture is. And when you're a new kid coming in, especially me being from the West Coast, I was never steeped in kind of the culture of DC. So I stuck out like a sore thumb. And there were a few times where I'd be living my cover and saying the right things and what I was supposed to, and people would give me that look, be like, don't bullshit me, man. So realizing very quickly that you had to up your game in your ability to defend your cover and be in the position that you were in. That was definitely a learning curve. There was one night where I was invited out by a friend's wife who was visiting, and her and her friends, they were just grilling me with all these cover challenging questions. And then at the end of the night, it turns out they were all CIA and they knew who I was already. So I
Oh,
guess
really?
I looked like a real idiot in front of that group, which was pretty funny. And then on the work side, I would say one of my overseas tours, I was, let's say in Eastern Europe somewhere, and I came across this guy who was an American citizen whose family had repatriated after some change in geopolitical events. And hearing the perspective of what it meant to be an American abroad from him within the context of being a CIA officer, listening to it, it makes you think in a lot of different dimensions of what it means to be an American that I would have otherwise never heard as a private citizen or even in the military. I took a lot of growth from that conversation.
Can you share anything from?
Well, yeah, it's more like America is a lot more than those of us that are here at home watching the news, participating in political events, even this candidacy that I'm doing right now. Like, yeah, this is America, the majority of America, but there's an entire subset of Americans that live abroad outside the US. I think 5 to 7 million people was the last number that I remember hearing. And they are experiencing the same emotions, feelings that we are about politics, the economics, about the social shifts that are happening in the US, but they're experiencing it from a lens that is so far away from us geographically and socially that you hear a lot of different reflections or a lot more nuance in the way that they see what their country is anymore, even though they're not physically in it. It's fascinating. And I encourage that if anybody listening is interested in this stuff, if you have friends that are living abroad, serving overseas, if you can get out there, visit them, but if not, just get in touch and like ask what people really think about us as a people abroad. And so it'll be illuminating.
It's funny you say that because I've been fortunate enough to live abroad. I travel a lot for work, and from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, I've traveled and lived abroad, throughout all of these different presidencies. And it's really fascinating and interesting how you kind of feel representing America and how people respond to when you tell people you're American. Like, depending on who is in office, it makes a huge difference. And
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize that was the case until, the first time I went to South America and Bush was president. And it was just, different than how I kind of perceived things and how I was perceived. And it just sort of opened my eyes to, obviously America is extremely influential across the world, but interacting with individual people, day-to-day citizens, how they perceive us. And it's interesting because, when you're traveling abroad, you are also representing America in your own way. And sometimes you find yourself having to defend America or defend, who's in office, or say, hey, just because it looks like this in the news, that's not what it's really like, here, or vice versa sometimes. So it's really interesting you brought that up. So tell us about sort of that transition and the ultimate decision to exit the CIA and go into politics. Obviously, we live in a very charged world right now, a very global world, a very interconnected world. And obviously, you've seen, a lot from your work experience, how that all kind of plays out and interacts. So, yeah, what was that kind of final decision and that transition like for you?
1 second, sorry, man. Excuse me. I think there was no one deciding factor that kicked me into the political life. It was a lot. I white knuckled my way through the first Trump administration, right? I was a junior CIA case officer doing my best and seeing what I saw was very unserious approaches to foreign policy. And I don't think that's an indictment of, like, if you got Republican listeners or Democrat listeners, it's not controversial to say that the approach to foreign policy under the Trump administration the first time was pretty unserious. There were adults in the room. General Mad Dog Mattis was the head of the Joint Chiefs for at least for a little while in the beginning. So there was this idea that there were adults in the room, and that even if we didn't like Trump's communication style or his policy intent, there were still, red-blooded, good American patriots guiding the hand. In Trump 2, as soon as this came down, I was overseas when he was elected. In Trump 2, the rogues gallery that was put together for his cabinet and oversight over the intelligence services, I would say that the unseriousness that I saw in the beginning expanded. And at this point, we're at war with Iran at this point, and I don't see a lot of serious, steady-handed people guiding the policy that is, governing the life and death situations that our American service members are in. What kicked me out, or what made me want to enter the political world, was this sense that we do need sober leadership, not just in the Republican Party, but in the Democratic Party as well. I think a lot of Congress has gotten so wrapped around the axle of either fundraising for their next election or identity politics to just drag the other side, whichever side we're talking about, that we forgot to govern, and we forgot to serve our constituents and be a conduit of good information, but also an open listening ear to what people actually need to improve their lives here in the homeland. That's something that we lost. So I saw a bunch of bad policy on foreign policy. I saw our domestic policy and our social landscape here at home going bad. And I figured, I didn't see anybody with my background or the vibe that I wanted in politics available running. And in that case, if I don't see anybody, then I thought maybe I had the responsibility to be that guy doing it. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of like the thought process that went into me deciding to enter politics.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, for this media channel, we stay, pretty in the middle. I lived in San Diego for about 12 years, and it's a really interesting city to live in because, and you're from California. On one end, it's this beautiful California beach town. On the other end, it's this huge military town. And so
Yeah,
I've
Coronado.
always
I spent a lot of
enjoyed
time out
kind
in
of,
Coronado.
yeah, I've always enjoyed, kind of being able to experience and see both sides and sort of take my own opinions away from that. So let's start. So that's what like stuck out for me was you kind of represent sort of that just, normal middle sort of space. Like you can see both sides, you have the experience, you're going to take it and then apply it to your policies. Let's start locally, or I guess nationally. Like this, we're in such a weird, unique time. There's so many things happening. It's kind of like every week there's something new. There was ice happening a couple of weeks ago in Minnesota. There was Trump, threatening to take Greenland and pissing off all of our allies. Now, then there's Venezuela, and now we're smack dab in the middle of this Iran war. So what would you say, in your opinion, whether it's global or national, is kind of the top issue we're facing? And maybe it's not what the average normal American is seeing in the news or their favorite media channel. Like, in your opinion, what is the most pressing matter that we're facing as a country?
Oh man. So for me, it's easy. I think the thing that's killing us as a country is the hollowing out of trust in American institutions and the knee-jerk distrust between elected officials and the average citizen, including me. Like I don't consider myself outside of this. Nobody, left, right, wherever you sit on the paradigm, nobody really trusts that the politicians in Washington are looking out for the best interests of their constituents as their guiding principle. They might accidentally get it right occasionally or when it's politically advantageous for them to do it. But I think the idea of incumbents sitting in office and sitting in the halls of power for 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the same seat, with all of the money swirling around it, with all of these little backroom power networks that we know exist, I think that is killing our ability as Americans to engage in good faith with our own government. And this is the crux of my candidacy. I got really smart ideas, I think, about nuclear energy and how to bring down housing costs and how to make life more affordable and healthcare more accessible. I do have those ideas. But if we're likening the American social landscape right now to a patient in the ER room, you have to stop the bleeding before you start the breathing again. And the bleeding is the trust in institutions and the good faith engagement in modern politics by elected officials. And that's why I think without cleaning the slate from these longtime incumbents that have been in the halls of power, both Democrat and Republican, if we don't clean that slate, there's no way to move forward and actually making people's lives better. And we are doomed to continue this death spiral of wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on elections and losing campaigns, while at the same time people can't afford groceries or to live their lives, and driving those people further and further from caring about or engaging in the political process. And until we have trustworthy politicians like myself, I consider myself maybe potentially one of them, until we have trustworthy politicians that don't have 20 years of complicated history behind them, we're not going to get that trust back. And without that trust, the American Republic as constructed through the Constitution becomes a lot less viable over time.
So what is causing the loss of this trust, this bleeding, as you mentioned? Is it these media conglomerates, buying up every media channel? Is it these tech oligarchy billionaires? Is it corruption? Is it wealth inequality, power consolidation? Like, there's a lot of mistrust happening, right? Like, I have conversations with my friends on all sides of the political spectrum, and everyone's pissed off about all of what's happening, right?
Yep.
No matter where they lean. I have best friends who voted for Trump and best friends who are, very liberal. And I think it's, kind of this extremism that's happening. And how do we kind of pull that back in? And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, what is the cause of this mistrust, and how can we, as average human citizens, Americans, do something about this? Because that's the other problem too. It does feel like, cool, these billionaires, these 20 billionaires have all the power, and at this point they've cheated the system. Pull the ladder up behind them. Like, what can we really do about this problem?
Yeah, I mean, from a policy perspective, I can give you a few ideas. Obviously, I think a wealth tax or some way to even the divide between the lowest income and highest income in the U.S. Is it fair to punish success in terms of billionaires? Probably not. But can our country survive with the runaway wealth inequality that we have? Also, probably not. So there's going to have to be a compromise somewhere in there. But to the broader question of like how we got here, I think it's yes and yes and yes. The media ecosystem for the last 30 years, since 24-hour news became a thing essentially in the late 80s, 90s, was incentivized on conflict and wedge driving and trying to segregate people into these little boxes that could be relied upon as consumers for these news networks. So that was one thing. And then the advent of social media and selective algorithms further drove people into these echo chambers of identity, or at least like reactive identity against something else. And then social media also paradoxically offers the best chance that we have at direct communication. That's how you and I met. That's how I'm getting my message out there about the Iran war. It's because we now have direct to viewer listener communication channels, but we're also financially incentivized, even as creators or people online, to tailor to what works and how to get to people that most agree with us, because there's a financial incentive. It's a tightly wound knot. But if you're asking how we get back to the middle, I think we're already in the middle. Excuse me. One of the things that I've noticed, like doing politics, now that I'm on the street getting signatures for my ballot petition, I'm calling people, I'm doing the politics. And what I'm noticing is that even center right Republicans, I am a Democrat, a progressive Democrat, but even center right Republicans, when you start this conversation, we all exist kind of in the middle of this political spectrum, and we are convinced daily that the other side hates us, doesn't agree with us, but that's just the loudest voices on either the left or the right. As soon as you start breaking down the walls, having the patience and then coming from a position of good faith, talking to even people that disagree with you, you'll find out that you agree on more than you think. And the disagreements, that's where that's where politics is supposed to happen. I think there's a chance right now that with the excesses of the Trump administration, a lot of people on the right that would never even countenance a Democrat might come back. And with the excesses of poor financial behavior on the part of some Democrats in Congress, some Democrats are already moving more to the center left and away from the activist space that they've seen co-opted time and time again by financial interests. So what I see happening is this coalescence of like Americans, just Americans, not your political party, not team sports, not branding, that want to see actual progress on things. And if new freshman legislators like me, if I get in, or some of my colleagues that I'm running alongside with here in Virginia, if we can get in this term, in this time of uncertainty, and actually deliver tangible results to our constituents, it might start building trust among them and keeping that coalition right in the middle to move our country forward again, or at least reclaim some of the ground that we've lost in terms of civil liberties.
You bring up a really good point there. And so, from my perspective, in kind of like this media, international, global policy world, I noticed Trump's first administration, whether you want to say weaponized it or took advantage, he really caused, I think, that sort of you either have to pick a side. And it had me like arguing, pissed off at my friends, family members. And ultimately, like as the kind of dust settled a little bit and things cooled down and we were able to have conversations about it and not just like pointing fingers and blaming each other. As you mentioned, most people, I think, tend to be more in that middle. And it's just those extremes that have a louder voice. They get the opinions, they get the clicks. And the louder they are, the more money they make. So they want to be more controversial. But most people are sick of that. And I think we're starting to notice that a lot more and kind of seeing through this facade. So that this second Trump administration, the people who were gung ho last administration are a little bit more wary. They're a little bit more open to saying, okay, I don't agree with everything that he said. And same thing as you mentioned on the other side, my friends who are more liberal are kind of like, yeah, I think we just got kind of influenced a little bit. And that's kind of the crazy world we live in with this 24/7 news cycle and social media. But at the same time, as you mentioned, that's how we found each other. And I think people are ultimately able to see the echo chamber that they were kind of like forced into when they would click, through social media. And now hopefully most people are able to step back a little bit and kind of see what's happening. So that's exciting.
One thing that I think is pretty unique about my candidacy specifically is I think the financial incentive, both in media and just, for like passive corruption, as we've seen come out of Washington time and time again. It's this idea that like everybody's in it for themselves and to make money. So as part of my campaign, and I hope your listeners will find this interesting, but as part of my campaign, I'm making a personal financial ethics pledge, which is pretty important to me, which says essentially, I ain't going to trade stocks in office. I'm going to keep all of my books open for review whenever anybody wants. Like my Navy Federal Bank account will be you can see exactly how much money I'm making at any time. And then most importantly, any money that I make beyond my congressional salary, because your boy got to pay his mortgage, but any money that I make beyond my salary, 50% of that I donate automatically back to my district for programs that support childcare, veterans, family housing, this kind of thing. Is it going to be a lot of money? Probably not enough to solve problems, but is it a show of good faith to people on the left and the right that no matter if you agree with my politics or not, this kid is doing it the right way. He's doing something different than everybody else, and he's not waiting for legislation to tell him to do it. I think that's a step forward. I would love to see other people adopt this, but until they do, I'm happy to be the voice in the crowd.
That's amazing. Thank you for that transparency. Yeah, that's another thing, making headlines all the time is, these senators, politicians, congressmen and women making insane amounts of money, which can only guess where that information comes from.
Yeah.
But we'll save that conversation for another day. Let's focus more on like solutions, right? We can all point out
Mhm.
problems, but one thing, kind of studying up on what you're working on is you kind of have these 8 different points. So tell us a little bit about, where you see these kind of small wins can actually start making, a positive impact on your communities. And then hopefully for our listeners, we can pull from that and apply that information around the world and around the country. So yeah, where are you kind of seeing areas on a local perspective that there's ability to make positive changes?
Sure. So I do have the eight priorities. Our branding is the eight priorities for the eighth district. So the eight priorities they're varied, but they stack into three different buckets. The first is accountability. There has to be consequences in our government if you violate the Constitution or break the law. There just has to be, and there hasn't been. In my district here, you have a lot of families and a lot of serious professionals that were driven out of government when Doge came in and started slashing the federal bureaucracy. There is a conversation to be had about efficiency in government, and there should probably be smart initiatives applied to make government more efficient. There's fat to be trimmed, essentially. But the way that Doge did it was disrespectful to really dedicated public servants, and it upended the financial futures of so many families in this area, and none of those guys saw any consequences. Right now, I don't know if you've seen these, but the guys from Doge are going through these depositions in court, and it's very clear when I say unserious leadership, that's unserious leadership. These guys had no idea about the systems that they were even interacting with, and yet they were given editorial authority to do with those systems what they saw fit. That's not good governance. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. We can all acknowledge that you need to understand the system you're overseeing before you're allowed to oversee it. That's just good governance. So there has to be consequences for anybody that broke the law as part of that really slipshod amateur approach to government efficiency. I would say with the ICE shootings and DHS in general, there has to be consequences if you come on national television and lie to the American public, and there has to be consequences if you pull the trigger on an American citizen unprompted. And that's just true. And I understand that people on the right will disagree and say, oh, well, like they're out there fighting the good fight. I came out of the war on terror. We all lived through a generation on the war on terror where you're given a gun, a flag on your shoulder, and told you're doing the right thing. But I'll say in the war on terror, we in Afghanistan, Iraq, and everywhere else that we fought, we all had higher standards of rules of engagement than it seems like those ICE officers in Minneapolis employed against civilians, American civilians. There has to be consequences for that. And I'm not knocking every single law enforcement officer within the DHS architecture, but I am saying you cannot watch those videos, you cannot see those things and disagree that that was beyond the pale and should never happen within our borders. And without consequences for that and all of the shenanigans that went on with every other agency when this administration came in, we're bound to repeat those mistakes. And I'm more invested in making sure that we stop making those same mistakes over and over again. Well, I was going to say, and then as far as like what actually makes life better here in Virginia with my eight priorities that I'm trying to implement, I think the Department of Education is a good example. You know, we just torpedoed the federal DOE, so states are now having to step in and set their own educational policy. Virginia is actually way ahead of the curve on this, and there's a lot of good policy coming out of Richmond right now that can be replicated across other states, and we are seeing that already. I've been in conversations with other candidates and other lawmakers from the region along the East Coast, essentially, trying to figure out good ways to incorporate workforce Pell or programs that make sure there is a healthy, active, and proactive pipeline for kids coming out of not just universities, but community colleges, trade schools, et cetera, to have decent paying wages in reliable jobs with a lot of the major tech firms that are seeing record profits, but not yet implementing any sort of local workforce hiring programs. This is something that I'll be focusing on a lot, and I think that could be replicated nationally if I have some success.
Well, Adam, we're coming up on our time, so a couple more questions for you. What is kind of the next step in this process for you?
Oh boy. So the next step, so Virginia is in the middle. For anybody not aware, Virginia is in the middle of potentially redistricting their congressional districts in the same way that California did, as initiated by Texas when we all started getting real sloppy with the rules on what a congressional district should look like. So Virginia on April 21st is going to go to the polls and decide whether to redraw the congressional districts. If that's the case, my race shifts over to a different district that runs through where I live now because I'm going to run where I live. And so that's my big next wicket. For me personally and my team, my staff that's working on this, it's always going to be fundraising. And so if I can put in a modest and humble fundraising plug, if you guys want to check us out on socials, we're at Adam Dungan, VA8. Go see the stuff we're putting out. And if you like the tone and the message that we're pinging on, like consider if anybody can donate 8, 10, 20 bucks, it really goes a long way to getting this message over the line and putting some accountability and trust back in government.
Well, Adam, thank you so much. I was going to say, yeah, throw in a plug there for how we can support you. I know we're really just scratching the surface on all the different things we could talk about. You've got some amazing experience, really cool stories that I'd love to learn more about, and um, ambitious goals. And I'm really excited to kind of watch that unfold. So, but first and foremost, wanna take a moment to thank you for joining us on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. This is great, and I'm happy to come back at your leisure. I do have some stories I can prepare for next time, but just gotta make sure that they're not classified.
Yeah. Well, there we go. We'll have to have you back on. Yeah, we can maybe make this, an ongoing thing as, what's happening unfolds. But yeah, again, just want to thank you. I'll let you go. I know you're a busy guy. You got a lot to get out there and get done. And also, I want to take a moment to thank all of our listeners, supporters, watchers, viewers on the Intelligence Report. Our goal is to bring you neutral, geopolitical, global news, global policymakers, international business, just people who are out there doing positive things for the planet. And I think, Adam is a perfect representative of that. And I'm really excited that you showed up in my feed. We were able to have this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to, watching your career unfold. So, Adam, one more time, thanks again for coming on the show.
Likewise, brother. See you next time.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone who listened. We'll see you on the next episode of the Intelligence Report.